everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I'm building the Mini Mean Machine by Estes. And this is an approximately half-size version of the larger Mean Machine. This one runs on 13mm mini motors instead of the standard 18mm ones. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and open this up. Make sure we have everything. This rocket's particularly nice if you have small launch fields, because it is still of impressive size, but it's very, very lightweight, and so it can run on the mini engines without problem. Alright, let's find our instructions here and make sure that we have all of our parts. Alright, so we have the two body tubes here and a nose cone. Fin stock. The decal should be here, yep. Within the small parts bag here we have the motor mount tube, two very small launch lugs there, engine clip, shock cord, parachute, coupler. There is a sleeve that's already on the motor mount tube there. We have the engine block and two centering rings. Alright, and that looks like we have everything that we need. I'm going to put most of this aside and we will start in on the build. The first thing to do here is to cut a notch, actually all the way through one of those centering rings. Okay, and so it needs to be 1/8 of an inch wide. Basically it has to be the width of the engine clip here. So I'm going to just use my engine clip as a guide here and mark on either side of that. And then just use my hobby knife to cut through. Okay, we got a little bit there. We'll just pop that off. There we go. So one of your rings should be opened up like that, the other one remains closed. Next we need to mark two lines on the body tube. So starting at the aft end, we need one at 1 centimeter or 10 millimeters here. If you're not metrically inclined, this is about 3/8 of an inch. And then another line at 3.8 centimeters or 1.5 inches from the aft end. Okay. And then on the forward end here, we're going to cut a slot that's 1/8 of an inch wide here, just like that. And this is going to be just wide enough to allow the clip to pop in there, just like that. Okay, now notice that hides my other mark there, so I'm going to extend it a little bit so I can see it there. Okay, now we're going to install here the aft split ring here, and that's going to go up from the bottom, and then the sleeve, this part here. Okay, and then the other ring will go up here on the forward end. Alright, so first of all we're going to put this on here, and this is going to be no, that should go up. Okay, so we want our centering ring, when it's in place it's going to go right there. Okay, so to do this I'm going to use some wood glue. You can also use white glue. And then I'm going to use a little applicator here because the orifice on my glue nozzle there is actually really big. So here, this is just basically an elongated Q-tip. Alright, and we're going to make a ring of glue here all the way around at the level of that aft line. Okay. try not to get it on the engine clip itself. But right next to it there. Okay, and I'm going to pop this on. Alright, and slide it up again right to the mark that we made there. Okay, and we're just going to hold that there for a few seconds. So I can come around just a little bit. Alright, so while the glue's still wet, make sure that this is all in alignment. You can see I cut a little bit of an angle there. That was unintentional, but it will still work that way. Okay, and then if you want, you can actually take a little piece of masking tape here. And I'm going to use that to maintain some compression on this, since having that notch there is going to tend to allow it to open up, and we don't want that while the glue is drying. Okay. Alright, and then next we're going to apply some more glue just above there. Okay, so just forward of the ring, I'm going to put another layer of glue here, and this is where the sleeve will go in. Okay, so this sleeve here, this is going to come down from the forward end, and this is going to hold that engine clip in place. Right, now here, go ahead and smooth in any excess glue. Alright, mainly we just don't want it on the outside of the ring there. Okay, and then the last bit of glue is going to go around the forward end here. And then this centering ring goes right on. It's a little bit snug there, we'll get it. Alright, let's do this just a little bit differently. What has happened, as soon as I put the glue on there, the cardboard swelled a bit. Okay, so what I should have done is slid this on first, apply the glue and slide it back into place. Alright, so here I got the ring back into place, and now I'm going to go ahead and put the glue on here, and then pull that up carefully. Being careful that I don't pull it all the way back off again. Okay, now it's not quite flush with the top, but that's fine. That will be mountable just like it is. Okay, and I'm going to let this completely dry, and then we'll come back to it later on. Okay, my centering rings have dried enough that I can handle the mount without worrying about it coming loose. And so the one other thing we need to do for the motor mount is to install the engine block. And for this, we just need to put a bead of glue down here. Don't do this too heavily, as we don't want to force a bunch of glue down into the motor mount tube. And then just take the engine block here, push that into place until it hits the top of the engine clip, and then just make sure it's level all the way around. It's going to have a tendency to go down further on the side opposite to the engine clip, so you want to make sure you avoid that. While the motor mount is finishing drying, we can move on to mark the body tube here. And so just pick one of the two tubes, they're both identical. And we'll need to cut out the engine marking, or the fin marking guide here, excuse me. Alright, so that's right here, and we just want to make sure it's not on anything. So I'm going to cut this out. If you don't want to destroy your instructions, you can simply make a photocopy of this page, and that'll give you not only the fin marking guide, but also the shock cord mount that we'll use later on. Okay, so for the fin marking guide, just cut this out. You can use scissors. Try not to drop your hobby knife there. So to cut this out, you can use either scissors or your hobby knife. And just cut this all along the edges. Alright, and make sure you do include the gray stripe area there. And now have a piece of masking tape handy. And we're simply going to wrap this around the aft end of the tube. So start with the end that has the gray strip on it there, and then we're going to fold this all the way around so that we overlap the gray area and then line up the tick marks there. Now if it doesn't quite extend all the way around, so mine's got a little open gap there, that's fine. Okay, and then put some tape on that. This is actually kind of wide tape. I'm going to pull that down a little. Okay. So we get some narrow pieces of tape, and I like to actually tape it to the tube this way. That way it won't spin around the tube while I'm marking. Okay, and then for each one of the lines here, just put a little tick mark on the tube. Like that. Go around each one. Okay, now this one, the LL, this is for the launch lug. I'm going to mark it here on the tube so I don't accidentally put a fin there. Okay, just like that. And we'll just carefully take this back off. Alright, set that aside just in case I need it again. Okay, and now the instructions have us take this to a door frame to draw a straight line down it. Okay, now I can't do that under the camera, and so instead I am going to use this fin marking guide that Estes produces. And this has really been a wise investment, I think. It just makes it easier to do this type of work, and it also keeps you from making pencil lines all over your door frames. Okay, so all of the fin lines here, I can just pretty much connect the two tick marks that I made. Now my launch lug line, I'm going to put up about halfway up the body tube. I'm going to take a look here. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is how far up the forward launch lug has to be, and that's showing at 8.5 inches or about 21.5 centimeters. Okay, so basically halfway up the tube. So for the launch lug line, I'm just going to take this and extend it up like that, so that I've got alignment for the launch lugs once we put those on. Next we have to prepare the fins. And at minimum, what you want to do is give them a good sanding here. And so before you even take them out of the stock piece, just take some 100 or 150 grit sandpaper. Okay, and then once you've got that done, go ahead and cut through the little nubs that are left from the laser cutting process. Okay, so there's our fins. There's actually quite a bit of balsa left on this, so this is I'm going to put this into my balsa junk box, which I use for fins and repairs later on. Once the fins are all cut out, you can start by just stacking these together and then have some 100 or 150 grit sandpaper and just put that on a flat surface like your table here, and just go ahead and stack these and sand each edge. And this is mainly just to remove the soot from the laser burns there, but it'll also help make sure that they're all uniformly the same size. Okay, so that's really the bare minimum fin treatment here. Okay, now if you want more altitude and better aerodynamics, we can round off the leading edge here, and the leading edge is going to be parallel with the grain. Okay, the root edge here will be where it attaches to the rocket, and we don't want to do anything else to this. It should just be sanded flat. Now to shape these, go ahead and take your sandpaper here. Again, 150 or 100 grit works fine. And I first just take and sand the edges of the leading edge here. So I'm knocking down the corner edges. All right, and then once you get that done, you can just start rounding it by rotating your sandpaper like this. You can also do the same thing if you're a little more coordinated by taking the fin and rotating it against stationary sandpaper. Okay, and then just periodically check this in cross section to see that it's even. Okay, so that's rounded there. You can continue to do this on the trailing edge and either round it off or even taper it to a knife edge here. But doing the leading edge gives you the greatest increase by itself. Okay, the drawback if you do the trailing edge, especially if you put it into a knife edge here so you have something resembling a true airfoil, is that hard landings will tend to chip that edge and lead to fin breakage. And so unless you're actually trying to set altitude records or speed records or something like that, I actually like to have the compromise here and retain the strength of the fin by not tapering the trailing edge, but by smoothing the leading edge there. And then the tip edge, you can usually just use that as a square edge as well. Okay, so I'm going to round the leading edges of my other 3 fins off camera. Now that I have the fins sanded, I'm going to also seal them using a polyurethane based sanding sealer here. And what this will do is help fill in the wood grain. Now you don't need to do this, it's optional. And if you don't mind having the wood grain show through the paint, that's fine. But if you do want smoother fins with less grain showing here, you can fill in that grain. Now there are lots of different options for sanding sealer out there. Some are water-based, some are pastes. This one is a polyurethane based one. And one of the things I'm going to do to make this a little easier is I'm going to take a straight pin here and just stick it into the root edge. It doesn't have to go very far, and make sure that you don't get it canted so it ends up going through the side and into your finger. And I'm just going to take a cotton applicator here and apply the sanding sealer all around the fin. Try not to get it on the root edge. If you do, you can just sand it off later. And what this is doing is filling in the wood grain, and when it dries I will sand it, which will remove the top layer but leave whatever's down in the wood grain. And so by doing this several times you can build up the space within the grain so that it becomes flush with the surface, and then after you paint it you won't see any of the wood grain through the paint. Okay, and then if you take a piece of corrugated cardboard like this, and this is just a temporary display stand that I made, but you can then place the pin into the holes of the corrugated cardboard like that, and that will allow it to dry without sticking to a surface. Now I'm going to do the rest of this with the other 3 fins off camera and then come back. While the sanding sealer on my fins is still drying, we can move on to installing the motor mount. Now in the instructions it shows doing this after mounting the fins. However, I prefer to do it before mounting the fins so that if I slip or have some trouble getting this in, I don't damage the fins in the process. Alright, also my preference is to put the engine clip on the same side as my launch lug. So I'm just dry fitting this now, there's no glue on it yet. So I want to make sure everything's going to fit properly. Alright, and notice that's kind of snug. Alright, and the reason for that is my aft centering ring here is just a little bit bigger, and that's because where we cut it here it's not gripping completely to the tube there, and it's giving it just a little bit of a bump there. That's easily fixed. I'm just going to take some sandpaper here and just sand that part lightly. Just bring it down a little bit. Okay, and then I will try that again here. Okay, it's a little looser but still needs a little bit of work on it. So just come back and do it again. Almost there, still a little bit snug. And here I'm going to do all around the ring there just a little bit. There we go. Okay, now you may be wondering, is it possible to put a standard 18mm motor in this? And the answer is yes. To do that, what you would do is, instead of building the motor mount like this, is simply use one of these green rings, and you would insert that as a thrust ring up into the tube there. Alright, now what we're going to do with the motor mount is it's going to be flush with the aft centering ring, and so you would want to put your thrust ring up inside here so that the standard motor hangs at that same distance. Okay, but that's not really part of the kit, but if you're wondering if it's possible, the answer is yes, it is. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is put some glue up inside the tube, and I'm actually going to use some white glue for this, just because that is kind of tight and I want to give it a little more working time there. And again, I'm going to use an applicator for this. So I've got my glue here, and so when this is fully in place, it's going to be right here. So I'm going to use my thumb to mark about where that glue is going to go in. And I'm going to stick this up inside and not touch anything until I get to my thumbnail there. All right, and I'm just going to circle around, bring that back out. All right, and now I'm going to put this in, but not all the way up to the glue yet. And now I'm going to put a little more glue right along the inside edge of the body tube, and I can just shift the motor mount there out of the way as I need to. And a little bit of glue on the motor mount isn't going to hurt anything. But this way, we only get glue on the centering rings at the point of their attachment and not all the way up, which can cause the motor mount to jam. All right, so now I'm going to put this in and slide it up. All right, I'm going to bring that back. Oh, it did it. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. Alright, so this is still launchable. I'm not too worried about it. But we were supposed to get it that aftering flush here, and it went up too far, and as soon as it hit the glue, it stuck. Okay, but there's still more than enough clearance there, and actually having it a little bit more forward will make the rocket more stable rather than less. So aerodynamically, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, but take heed from my accident there. Try and put that in slowly. Mine just kind of gave way all of a sudden and then stopped. Okay, and now I'm going to let that dry completely before we do anything else with it. Here I have one of the fins, and the first coat of sanding sealer has dried. And so now I'm just going to sand this in the direction of the grain. I'm using 150 grit sandpaper here. And I'm simply taking the excess off the top. Now you can see here where it kind of pooled along there, that most of that's going to come off. Okay, and so now if you look at this, you can see most of the glossiness from the sanding sealer is gone. You can see it just down in the grain there, and that's what we're looking for. Alright, now this region here right along the root edge, I could continue sanding that, but to be honest, it's going to be covered up by the fillets anyway. But we can just do a little bit more here. See if we can get some of that off. Okay, and now depending on just how smooth of a finish you want, you can put on another coat and sand that, and another coat, sand that. You can just repeat doing this until you get the finish that you want. Okay, I'm usually good with just 2 coats or so, and so I'm just going to give my edges just a little bit of a sanding here. And I didn't get any on the root edge, so I'm going to just leave that alone. Okay, so I'm going to do the other 3 fins off camera and then recoat those. And when we come back, they'll be ready for mounting. While I'm waiting for glue and sanding sealer to dry, I'm going to go ahead and work on the parachute and the nose cone. Go ahead and remove the parachute there. For the nose cone, we just need to remove this little bit of flash that's in between the nose cone shoulder and the eyelet here. So just carefully cut through that. Be careful that you don't cut all the way through that eyelet though. So just a little bit at a time. Alright, and have the blade facing away from you. So if you slip, you only lose the eyelet and not a piece of your finger. Okay. And then for the parachute here, this is mostly pre-assembled. So first of all, just take the parachute and unfold this. This is a small parachute. This is only a 9-inch parachute here. Okay, and so once you've got it untangled, gather up the loops of shroud lines here onto one finger, like that. And then we're going to take the center of the parachute in your other hand, okay, and then we're just going to pull it taut. And all of those corners there where the shroud lines attach should be at about the same spot. If they aren't, you can move the shroud lines back and forth until they come close to it, if not completely there. Alright, and then take and form a loop here, pinch that off. You don't want to let the shroud lines change position relative to each other now. And according to the instructions, they just tie this off here. So you put the loops through. Alright, gather those up again. And then when you get a big enough loop, you pass the entire nose cone through and pull it taut. Now I'm not going to do that because I don't like to do my shroud lines that way. So I'm going to come back here and recheck my length once more. Make sure I'm not slipping or sliding, getting uneven. Okay, now I'm going to take and do the same thing. Alright, gather my loops together. I'm going to pinch them down really small, because I'm going to use this snap swivel here to attach my parachute. You can get this in the fishing section of any department store or sporting goods store. Alright, and so I'm going to take the swivel end that has just a loop ring here, and I'm going to pass my loops through the ring. Alright, and again, I'm always hanging on to this back part so the shroud lines don't change position. Alright, now open up that loop again, and I'm going to pass the entire snap swivel through the loops. Okay, so it's going to be back like this now. Alright, so the loop's there, and now I'm just going to pull that taut to form a knot on the loop. Now I'm going to come back to my parachute once more, pull it taut, make sure I'm still reasonably close, and I am. Alright, once you've got that where you want it, then take just a little dab of wood glue or white glue and put it on the knot so it won't come loose. Okay, just a little tiny bit there. Just going to work that in. Okay, and now when I'm ready to put this onto the rocket, I can just open up the snap part there, pass that through, there we go, and then snap it on. Okay, now our shock cord will also be attached to this as well. Alright, and this does two things. One is it makes it easy to change your parachutes out. So if you get a damaged chute, or you need maybe a little bit bigger chute, or you want to replace the chute with a streamer, you just unclip this and put on the new recovery device. Also, the swivel itself will help, theoretically at least, keep the chute from winding up the shroud lines if it's a little off balance. So you can see, as I put torsion on that, it loosens itself up again. Now, for the nose cone itself, I'm going to go ahead and take this off. Okay, and this actually shows something that I want to make a point of. The size of the snap swivel itself doesn't make a lot of difference because for the weight of this rocket, any size snap swivel will be more than enough. What is important is that the snap side is big enough to go around the eyelet here freely, but not so big that it jams up inside there. Okay, so the snap end is actually more important size-wise than the swivel end is. So I'm going to set that aside. Okay, now this nose cone was made in 2 halves that were then sealed together here, and so you can see a seam there on both sides. And you've got a few choices here. The easiest is to simply ignore it and not worry about the fact that it's there. And from a distance you won't notice it either. But if you want to make that a little bit more smooth, you can start with sanding it with some 220 grit sandpaper. Okay, like this. And I'm going to first start by just sanding that seam all the way up. And this will knock down any high edges. Okay, and then turn it around and do the other seam as well. You usually don't need to do it to the shoulder unless you've just got one that's really sticking up a lot. Okay, and then you may still have a little bit of a valley showing there. And I'm not going to do it with this rocket because this nose cone is so small, but you can use something like this. So this is Contour Putty. Testers is the brand I have here. There are several others. But this you simply squirt some on there, work it in with your finger, let it dry and sand it off, and it will fill in the cracks and grooves there. Okay, this is looking like that the sandpaper is going to do a good enough job that after this is primed and painted, you probably won't notice it. Okay. Now if you want to, you can also sand this with an even finer sandpaper like 320 or 400 grit. But I found that if you're going to add a layer of primer and then paint on top of it, the 220 is usually fine. And all this is doing is taking the gloss off the surface of the nose cone, and this will let the paint adhere better. Okay. Now that brings me to another point. Even though we don't have the fins on this yet, if you look at the package illustration here, they use a 2-color scheme where the lower half of the rocket is white and the upper half is blue. And so if you want to continue that type of a theme, even if you use different colors, what I recommend is after we get the fins on here is go ahead and paint the bottom section whichever color you want, and then paint the top section whichever color you want before we stick them together. And then if you want to do the nose cone a 3rd color, or just the same color as the base, or whatever it happens to be, if you're going to paint this, you can paint it separately as well. Something else we can do while we're waiting for glue and sanding sealer to dry is install the shock cord. Now I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. The first way is what's illustrated in the instructions here. So we'll have to go up here to the front page once more and cut out the shock cord mount. Now again, like we did with the fin marking guide, if you don't want to cut up the instructions, simply make a photocopy of this and then cut it up. And you can do either scissors or your hobby knife here. So I'm just going to cut this out quick. Alright, and then what we'll do here is we'll take the shock cord, alright, and it's going to lay across the 3 and the 2 here. I'm going to do it at a little bit of an angle, and I'll show you why here in just a minute. And so for this, again, you can use either white glue or wood glue. So I'm just going to put a fairly healthy bead of glue along here. And we're going to smear this around a bit. Okay, and now I'm going to take the shock cord, and again I'm putting in an angle here. I want to draw that down a bit. And now I'm going to fold the 1 onto the 2, like that. Alright, get good contact all around. And I'm going to fold the 2 onto the 3, like this. And this is why I offset it, so that when this folds over itself, the shock cord is laying against itself rather than right on top. Okay, and now I'm going to put a convex bend into this. Okay, and again, make sure you get the glue nice and even within that. Okay, now I'm not going to do this next part for real because I'm going to use a different method. Oops, get back on there. Okay, but now normally I would put some more glue on this face that's concaved, or convexed it would be from that point of view. And come on, get down there. Alright, and then slide this down as far as you can get it to go. Okay, at least 1.5 inches, if not further. Alright, so you can see it there. I'm going to put this down even further. And then if you got long skinny fingers, that's great. If not, you can use a pencil or something like that, but you want to press that against the inner wall of the body tube and get it as flat against there as you can. You don't want this bulging out at all. And then set it aside to rest. Okay. Well, and then once it's fully dry, you can assemble this with the nose cone. Now, I'm going to pull it back out because I'm going to do a different method here. And this you're going to have some extra material. So, one of the things I've run into over many years of doing this is when you've got a really narrow body tube like this, and then you're putting a parachute in there, that the extra room there that shock cord mount takes up is often enough to prevent the chute from deploying properly. And so an alternative to that is to use Kevlar. Okay. Now Kevlar line you may not be able to find easily at your department stores. Some hobby shops get it, and I get this by mail from Amazon. But this is 100-pound test, and you can see it's very thin diameter. Okay. Now, the only drawback to this stuff is that it's completely non-elastic, so you have to have quite a bit of it. Now, the general rule of thumb for Kevlar is you want it 3 times the length of your rocket. Now, in this case, you could probably just do 3 times the length of the upper body tube, but we'll go ahead and use the whole thing. So I'm just going to start at this end. So there's 3 lengths of the body tube, and so if I want 3 lengths of the rocket, I just need to double that. Okay. Now part of the reason you need the length is due to the fact that you need the air resistance to slow it down rather than having an elastic rubber that slows down by itself. But also this is going to get attached deeper inside the rocket. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just cut that off there. Kevlar does fray quite a bit. It also doesn't hold knots very well. So one of the things I prefer to do initially after I cut this is I'm going to take just a little touch of super glue. Okay, and just enough that it wicks into there. I'm going to do that to both of the cut ends. Just like that. Alright, and then I'm just going to take a tissue and immediately wipe off the excess here. and what's left is going to dry really quickly. But this just keeps the ends from fraying and makes it easier to work with. Okay. Now, instead of using this with a shock cord mount like the typical Estes one there, it doesn't work very well with this. It tends to rip through it. Instead, what we're going to do is take the coupler here that will join the two halves together. Alright, so that's going to go in here. And what I'm going to do here is stick a hole just above the halfway point. So let me go ahead and measure this. Alright, so that's about 18 millimeters. So halfway down is going to be here at 9. Okay, so I'm going to use my hobby knife here to put a hole right above that. If you want, you can use a small drill bit to do this as well. I'm going to come around the other side here and put an opposing hole. Okay, and now I'm going to take one end of my Kevlar, and this is part of the reason why you want that super glue on there, is it makes it stiff on the end. So I'm going to slide that through. Alright, so once I've got one through, then I need to bring the other one through the other side from the inside. And this is a little bit more difficult. Catch that without poking myself in the finger. There we go. Alright, so what we've got now is a little bit off center from the coupler there. And now I'm going to make that as short as I can while I still have enough room to tie a knot here. And here I'm going to tie a water knot, or a fisherman's knot, rather than a double knot, because I want a loop in this. Okay, so I've got the little end there and the big long end, and I need both of them to come through. Alright, so we need to make sure we get both ends, the short end and the and the long end, to come through there. So go ahead and pull that all the way through. Okay, and then we can go ahead and cinch that down like that. And then go ahead and put just, again, a little tiny drop of super glue on that knot. Kevlar is really bad at holding knots because it's kind of a slippery substance to begin with. And so having that little bit of super glue just hardens the knot. Alright, now this is going to go up in the aft end of the forward body tube. Now, in order to do this so that we don't get glue all over the shock cord, I'm going to feed the free end of the shock cord down. And here, I'm just going to mark this so I don't miss my place. So this is going to go to the forward end, and this is going to go to the aft body tube here. And I don't want to get those mixed up because this is not quite centered. All right, so now I'm going to feed the long end through the coupler, going from fore to aft. Okay, so that now it looks like this from the front. Alright, so whichever end of your tube you want to be facing aft with the coupler, go ahead and just put a bead of glue in there, right at the edge. So we've got the glue there. Alright, I'm pulling the shock cord taut again, and you want it centered in there. Now this will cause a little bit of bulging of the body tube, and you just have to put up with that. Alright, and now I'm going to keep the back end taut, and I'm going to push this forward. There we go. Okay, so it's going to look like that, and we're go just a little more if we can. I don't think it's going to go, but that's fine. Okay, now once this dries, I will feed this back up so that it comes out the forward end of the tube. Alright, so let that set aside to dry. And now if you didn't put in this type of a shock cord, go ahead at this point and glue in the coupler in the same way that I just showed for the shock cord, except that you won't need the holes in it there. My fins have been sealed and sanded twice, and so now I'm ready to put them onto the rocket. One of the things I want to do here before I put the fins on is I'm going to lightly sand the area here where they'll attach. And this will just give a stronger bonding surface for the glue. You don't need to do this really hard. And any sandpaper between about 100 grit and 200 grit will work fine. After sanding, then I need to mark where the fins are actually going to go. And so they don't go right at the edge, they go 1 inch from the aft end here. So I'm just going to take my ruler here and align it with the aft end along each fin and just make one little mark here. Okay, and don't worry if you've sanded all the way down, it's not a big deal. Alright, and I have to do this for every one of the fin lines. And while we're doing this, let's go ahead and put in the measurements for the launch lugs. So the aft launch lug is going to also go at 1 inch from the aft end. So put that right there. And then the forward launch lug is going to go at 8.5 inches. I have to change rulers here. Lug line right there, and that's actually right about where the end of my line is, so that's close enough. Alright, now we're ready to put the fins on, and so I'm just going to take some wood glue here. You can also use white glue. If the wood glue is stronger, and it usually sets up faster. And the trick here is not to use too much. We actually just want a thin film of glue here. And I'm going to use a trick here that you don't find in the instructions anymore. I learned this when I was growing up doing model rocketry. And what I'm going to do here is attach the fin to my fin line, and I'm going to pull it back off so that now I've got two thin gluey surfaces. I'm going to let this dry for about 30 to 60 seconds and then put it back together. Alright, 60 seconds have passed, and now I'm going to put this right back on where it was. And what this has done is those two glue surfaces have become tacky, and this allows it to stand up on its own without falling over. Okay, now if you have too much glue, it doesn't work as well that way, and you may end up with a fin flopping over or coming out of alignment. Alright, and I would recommend letting this dry for at least 15 minutes if you're using wood glue, at least 30 minutes if you're using white glue, but then I'll go on to the next fins and do the same thing on each. Alright, I will do that part off camera, and it'll come back when all the fins are attached. Here my fins are dry, and now I'm going to attach the launch lugs. And again, these are in the small parts package. They're very tiny. Okay, and so the first one is going to go right here at that 1-inch mark. And again, if you want, you can take a little bit of sandpaper here and carefully sand that. Okay, and then do the same thing up here. Okay, and then just use a little bit of wood glue to attach them. And you can use a little bit heavier glue on these than you do on the fins because they don't have the same leverage trying to pull down. You still don't want a large amount. Okay, and then you're going to want to sight along the line and through the launch lug itself to make sure you've got that aligned properly. And then do the same thing with the forward launch lug. Okay, and then once again, sight down both along the line and then through both launch lugs. So the line and the launch lugs should all be lined up with each other, and they are. And so now I'm going to let this dry for another 15 to 30 minutes. Now that my fins and launch lugs are dry, I'm going to apply the fillets. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the launch lugs first here. Just apply a little bit of glue. And then smooth that in. And it's a good idea to have a paper towel or a rag or something handy here. Do it to the other side. Okay, and you can do all of the fillets at once as long as you let the rocket dry horizontally so that we don't have the glue running down to one end or the other. Okay, now the aft ones are going to be a little bit tight just because this is a small body tube and we've got 4 fins. So if you need to, you can use an applicator like this in place of your finger to help smooth that in. And you may need more than one. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and smooth along there. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to do the fins. I like to do facing fins at the same time here. And once again, I'm going to let this dry completely, and we're almost to the point of putting the rest of the rocket together. At this point, my fillets are dry, and if you would like thicker fillets, you can add another layer of glue here, or you can use wood filler or modeling putty. I often use this one that's made by Testers. There are several brands out there. And even then, depending on how thick you want them, it's better to do these in layers. So if you want to thicken these up a little bit, put a layer of putty or wood filler in there, let that dry, sand it a little bit, and then add to it if you want to. I'm quite happy with my glue fillets here, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Well, it looks like it might use a little bit right there. Okay, but I'll do that before painting. Now, at this point, you need to make a decision as to how you want to paint your rocket. So if we go back to the packaging here, alright, this shows a dark blue forward end and then a white aft end there. And that's the same color scheme that the full-size Mean Machine uses as well. Okay, but if you're going to do any type of multicolor scheme, I would suggest painting the two sections of the rocket and or the nose cone before we put it all together. Now, if you recall from earlier in the video, I decided to put on a Kevlar shock cord rather than the standard rubber one. And so if you did the same, one of the things we're going to need to do now is put the shock cord back up through the body tube. And I recommend doing this before you paint it, just in case you get some paint up on that coupler there. So we're just going to run this back up. And then I'm going to use a small amount of tissue paper and plug both ends of the tube while I'm painting so that I don't get paint down inside of it. Okay, now you can just take it from the other end, pull that all the way through. Alright, and now if we look down inside there, you can see where we strung it across the inside of that coupler, and we've got a nice firm anchor there. Okay, up here on this side, I'm just going to wrap this around my fingers for some temporary storage. Okay, I'm just going to slide that whole thing into the tube here. And now I'm just going to take a little bit of tissue, put that in. Okay, same thing here. Alright, now the reason that's harder to go in is, remember, we've got the shock cord going across there. Now if you use the standard mount, that would have been up here in the forward end, and do the same thing. Go ahead and slide the shock cord back down inside and then cover that with a little bit of tissue. And this is ready to go to be primed and painted. Okay, the lower body tube can be primed and painted as is. Some people like to cover up the motor mount. I usually just paint it, including the clip. It doesn't hurt it. Okay, but you might want to put some tissue down the forward end of the aft tube as well. So here is my painted rocket, not quite fully assembled, and as you can see, I decided to go with a black and yellow motif instead of the black and white shown on the packaging, and that's fine. You can have any color rocket you want. So now we just need to put this all together. So I need to join the two body tubes, and for that I'm just going to use some wood glue. And I'm going to run a bead on the inside of the aft body tube here. Okay, kind of even that out. Alright, you can see I've got a little bit of a tear here. That was from the masking tape. And what I'll do is I'll just twist that into position. So now I'm just going to insert that, give it a little bit of a twist, make sure everything seats properly. Right, I'm going to hold that here for just a few seconds, just to make sure it doesn't push itself apart. Alright, and I should be able to set that down. Now the other thing I need to do is shake out the shock cord here. Alright, so we'll set that down to let the coupler finish drying. And while that's happening, we'll take the shock cord, Now if you did the elastic shock cord, you're going to still do the same thing here. So just go ahead and unravel it. Alright, and we need to attach it to our nose cone. And just tie a double knot in here, whether you're using Kevlar or elastic. Okay, we want a little bit hanging here, but not too much, and you want to make sure that this does not get caught between the shoulder and the body tube when you put it all together, or it may not eject the parachute properly. If you're using Kevlar, I recommend putting just a little dab of super glue on that. And if you're using the elastic, put a little dab of white or wood glue on the knot. And in both cases, this is just to help keep it from unraveling. Doesn't take much, just enough to let it soak in there. Okay, now recall I put the parachute together earlier. If you use the method in the instructions, then the parachute would already be tied on to this. All right, recall though that I used a snap swivel, and so now my snap swivel just goes on here, all right, and snaps into place. Okay, and structurally the rocket's all done. We just need to put the decals on here. So I'm going to put everything back together on the rocket, and then we'll come back and do the decals. For the decals, we have a water slide set of decals here. And for positioning, you can refer to the illustration here in the instructions or to the packaging here. Okay, and that's just assuming that you want to do it the same way that Estes shows on their packaging. You're certainly welcome to use any type of pattern you want, place the decals where you want to, etc., and it will fly just fine without decals as well. So that's entirely up to you. I'm going to show how to do a few of these. I'm not going to do the whole rocket on camera, but the first thing we'll want to do is cut them out. So I'm going to start with the Mean Machine decal itself. And you'll also want to have a tray or a basin of room temperature or lukewarm water. So I'm just going to cut this whole thing out there. Alright, and then we don't need the fine print here. We'll cut that off as well. Okay, and then for now we'll cut away the bands there. Those will go on the tube as well. But this is our biggest one. Okay, and this is meant to go along the length here. So first of all, the only thing I'm really going to be concerned about is I want my decal to be on the opposite side of my launch lug so that when it's on the launch pad you can see it. Okay, but otherwise it can go pretty much anywhere in here. If you did your top part here in a lighter color than I did, you could also put it on the forward body tube. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. Alright, but now I'm going to put this in the water here and let it saturate the paper. And let that sit there for usually 15 to 20 seconds is enough. Now you don't want to do this on an unfinished rocket, so you do have to make sure you paint your rocket ahead of time. If you use brush paint, you're going to want to sand that and put a clear coat on, and that will help the decals stick better. If you're using spray paint, spray paint itself is fine. Glossy surfaces work better. Alright, so you can see how that's slipping around on there. I'm going to slide the whole thing over the edge. Just a little bit. Okay, so it's sticking out like that. And now I'm going to put a finger here, or a thumb, on that end. And now I'm going to simply pull the backing off from underneath and just let it slide right onto the rocket there. Okay. And now if I need to adjust it, what I do is pull it a little bit, and I can straighten it out if I need to. But you always want to have a little bit of tension on it as you pull. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Once you have it where you want it, then just simply take a tissue and gently squeegee the remaining water off the top and out of the bottom. Okay, always keep a grip on it there, and do this very lightly. If you pull too much, you'll rip the decal. Alright, that looks really nice that way. Okay, and you'll put the other decals on in the same way. So as I said, these two are meant to wrap around the rocket, and in the illustration, one goes up here at the joint of the two body tubes, the other goes down here near the fins. And then the red angles here, those are meant to go onto the fins themselves. Alright, and then you can put that little Estes decal pretty much wherever you want it. Okay, but for the purpose of this video, this rocket is done, and I hope you have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.